this computer. Okay, so I think you should be good. And then I usually just hit enter to advance. If you go too far,
Jump ahead or people.
then just go back with the arrows.
Oh, like that? Okay.
Yeah. So,
Good. Been a while since I've done it.
okay.
Quite a while.
So I'll be here. So is this one yours? Okay. All right, so we do have a few handouts. Or one handout, I guess, with it, so. That's all we need. Okay.
I hope I found the right balance between saving paper and still being able to read what's there on the Excel tables. I know those can be a challenge sometimes. Pamela is in.
A few extras and. All right. So, let me go ahead and introduce our speaker, I guess, for this morning. So this is Michaelin Orvis, joined last year, 2 years ago? 2 years ago. All right, time flies for me. And anyway, in a sermon that I preached a while back, I made a reference to the 90 minutes in heaven guy's experience of what he described when he went to heaven, right? And it really piqued an interest in Michaelin. And so she really did a lot of reading and research on it and approached me, was it last summer, I guess, or sometime about, maybe wanting to present some of this. And as I said in my announcement, I really wanted to lay out, okay, what does the Bible really say first? So then we can compare it with people's experiences. So that's what today is. So let's go ahead and begin with a word of prayer. Gracious God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, we are grateful for this morning and for the opportunity to worship you, and grateful for Michaelin that you laid it upon her heart to have this interest in studying this and presenting it for us today. And Lord, it's amazing to think that there are so many people walking around this world today who have gone through these experiences and have experienced amazing things of getting to witness you, getting to witness family and friends, and just the sheer peace and joy that they experience. I pray that you'll use Michaelin today to share that with us. So we pray this in your name, dear Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Okay, I have to thank Pastor for giving me this forum because he did mention, it turned out to be, I think, Don Piper, who was the pastor who was killed way back when. I don't remember. It's been almost 40 years, I think. In the 90, who eventually wrote the book 90 Minutes of Heaven, which became a movie. And so he mentioned something about this person being clinically dead for 45, or no, is it? I get confused sometimes whether it was for him, it was 45 minutes, or it was actually an hour and a half that he was clinically dead. And then there was another pastor who had been at the same conference that came up behind the accident, and God kept telling him, you have to go pray for this person. So he had to get past all of the police that were the state troopers that were there waiting for the coroner to come and pronounce him officially dead so they could take the body out of the vehicle. Well, he got under there somehow and prayed with him, and he was dead, clinically dead. We'll talk about that briefly in a second. And prayed with him that time. And then he started singing, I think it was Jesus Loves Me. And Don started singing it with him, which freaked him out, of course. And then he had to go back and tell the first responders, oh, by the way, this guy's alive. And so then they went into effect and they had to cut him out differently. And he made it to I think it was like 11 o'clock in the morning when it happened. He got run over by a semi, basically. Had horrific injuries. He got to the hospital, I think it was 6 o'clock at night, and that's the whole nother night. Anyway, so this movie came up in my YouTube. I didn't realize it at the time. Coincidentally, it came up in my YouTube feed called 90 Minutes in Heaven. And it had an actress in it that I knew. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I'll watch it. And I started watching it. I was like, oh my gosh, this is the story he talked about. So I watched the whole thing and I was like, wow. Because there's some things in there that are just the fact that he survived is amazing. But so then my daughter, who is a voracious reader, wanted to go to Barnes and Noble, and because she wanted a book, and when she wants a certain book in a series, she doesn't want to wait. And I like to encourage her reading. So we went to Barnes and Noble, and I was wandering around looking at stuff while she was finding her book, and I came across a book called Imagine Heaven. And I've got extra copies here, and there was two of them, Imagine Heaven and Imagine the God of Heaven. And Imagine Heaven is actually a pretty easy read. So I read that pretty quickly. And then I read the second, which is more about the character of God, how God presents in near death. But, and I'm thankful for this forum because I felt like I was going to explode. If I didn't talk about it or tell somebody about it, I went to the work at the thrift shop the next day and I was like, oh my gosh, the woman I was working with, I said, oh, I got to tell somebody. I said, she's like, how are you doing? I said, I'm doing awesome. And so we talked about it. She wanted to come. I should have looked and she wanted to know if we were going to publicize. Anyway, I gave her a book. I gave her a book because I bought more books and they were on sale. And so I've got books. If your interest is piqued, I've got the Imagine Heaven ones here, but I don't want to, we don't have a lot of time. So I'm going to get off that.
Michael, I'm gonna go up and shut the fans off, so you don't have to.
So thank you, God, and thank you, Pastor. So, okay, it's been a while. I've been out of the working world, so for a while. What are NDEs? There's no agreed upon definition. I've learned that. So we have to be careful. We have to use discernment. Because there's all kinds of paranormal experiences that people have. And they could all be, how shall I say, actual or God experiences. I don't know. But for today, what is considered an ND, a near-death experience, is events that take place as a person is on the brink of death or is already clinically dead, and they come back. And this is from just a study I found. I had to find a way to describe what this is. Because there's other things like if you've read 23 Minutes in Hell, that person doesn't die. He's like at night, he's taken there. So that would not fit this category. So this is just limited. What's clinical death? It's when your heart stops. And eventually, if your breathing hasn't already stopped, it will stop, which starves your brain. You're unconscious. So, please keep that in mind as we're going through this today. So all of these people either were on the verge of death or did actually die. Now, if they're dead long enough, clinically dead long enough, there will be brain damage, biological death, and they don't ever come back from that. So you've got this gray area in between. How common are they? Now, again, most of these things are talked about in the book, but in some cases, I wanted to go back to the original. But if you're interested and you want to read more about it, in this case, how common are the NDEs? This came from another study that was done by this Pim Lommel, who is talked about in the book. But the first point here, this Hope theory or area of NDEs was introduced to the world by Dr. Raymond Moody in 1975. He wrote a book called Life After Life. And in there, he summarized about 150 people that he had talked with that had gone through this and what it was like for them to die. And so this book was published and it went ballistic. I don't know how many copies of it were sold, but it was like reprinted in 14 languages. And I believe I read it. I don't have it, but when I saw a picture of the cover because I had a brother pass when I was a teenager. And so there's another one that I know I did read, but in the 40 years since Dr. Moody, he coined the term near-death experience. there's been studies, some by Gallup and others, but basically what the consensus was, and this was when this book was written, which is 2015, so we're now 10 years past that, that 4.2% of the US population has reported a near-death experience. So that's basically 1 out of every 25 people, or nearly 13 million Americans. And that was in 2015. If you take 4.5% of the population now, I don't know, that'd be a lot. In other words, there's a lot of people. There's also a lot of people that don't report for a variety of reasons. Either early on, if you reported it, people, I mean, the doctors saw this book and like, no way, no way. And even some pastors, because people would start to tell them this and they'd be like, you're crazy. Or you need to see a psychiatrist sometimes. And so there were a lot of people, especially if they were in high positions, they didn't dare talk about it because they would be afraid that their integrity would be questioned and it would be bad for them. So, but anyway, I guess, so there's a lot of people. This has happened to a lot of people. I'll put it that way. And again, these are all people who have either if there hadn't been medical intervention would have died, or they actually clinically died. So don't want to get into too much science, but I am a science, I was an engineering major, so I am a science person. And so for me, that was important, but there's just and again, there's no agreed upon what are the elements of these experiences. This is one, this Long and Perry book, Evidence of the Afterlife, was referenced in the Imagine Heaven book. And so I just went back to the original source to get a little more information. This is all quoted in these are all listed in the Imagine Heaven book. So the out-of-body experience, what does that mean? That means your consciousness leaves your body. You're able to observe your body from a point of view, from a third party, almost like a third party point of view, like a spectator. And quite frankly, that's quite compelling, especially if you're unconscious and I mean, how can you be looking at yourself and observe what they're doing and remembering what's going on in that environment when you're unconscious? And quite frankly, medicine has no explanation for how this can happen. I don't know a lot about doctors, but from what I understand, they tend to be naturalists. That means when your body dies, your biological body, you're gone, you're dead. But, and then I've got a percentage in the study that the scientists did. 75% of people that of the cases, and they had 614 cases that are in the study, and they took it down from over 1,000. They really tried to stream it down. Like, it was reported in English. It was reported by the specific person. They have a number of screenings they can do to try and determine to the highest level that it was an actual experience, not made up. So there was a series of things they went through when they chose these 614 cases, which is what the study is based on. So 75% of people did report this out-of-body experience. Heightened senses. You're more conscious and more alert than normal. It just seems so much more real than anything I had ever experienced in my entire life. So I guess at first, you'd think if this person's in medical crisis and they're seeing themselves from the body, they would be in such a situation that wouldn't it be compromised? Like their ability to see, their ability to understand what's going on. And it's not, it's actually heightened. Your senses, all of your senses are better than they are when you're in your body. So thought I had it somewhere I'm supposed to read it.
I knew the little boy in heaven is real, had that experience of being above his body. Right?
Yes.
That body.
He was not in any danger of dying, though,
No, he was,
according to his doctor.
okay, I don't know about that. Yes, he did have an out of body. Okay, so I've become a big fan of this person, Howard Storm. His experience started out as a hellish or frightening experience. And apparently that's what it took to get through to him. because he cried out to God. He remembered singing, Jesus loves me. He did go to Sunday school as a child, and then he had a lot of difficult things in his life. And he didn't say this in the book, but I've watched a lot of his interviews. He does so many interviews. If you Google him and you'll type YouTube, you'll find umpteen. He takes almost any time somebody wants to talk to him, to meet with him, he talks to them. And in one of them, unfortunately, he was about the age of 15 when he converted and became an atheist. But he really felt the Spirit. And so he started spending time with his pastor. And unfortunately, that specific pastor then opened up to him and said he really didn't believe anything of what he was saying, what he was teaching, but it was a job. He'd gone to like Harvard Divinity School. Yeah. And so that blew him out of the water. And he had a real difficult time at home. I won't digress into that, but anyway, and he went all the way down the atheist trail and became very self-centered. But okay, so I'm not going to talk all about his situation, but he died. He was in Paris, and it was a Saturday, and apparently in socialized medicine, there aren't always doctors around weekend. He kind of fell through the cracks. So he died. He said, could this be a dream? This has got to be a dream, but I knew that it wasn't. I was aware that I felt more alert, more aware, and this is very typical, and more alive than I'd ever felt in my entire life. All my senses were extremely vivid. And this guy's an artist. So he was, all relating to what he was a sculptor, he was a painter. Everything around and in me was alive. The linoleum tiles on the floor were slick and cool, and my bare feet felt moist and clammy against them. The bright light of the room illuminated every detail in crystal clarity. The mix of odors of stale urine, sweat, residue of bleach in the sheets. Enamel paint filled my nostrils. The sound of my breathing and the blood rushing through my veins hummed in my ears. He could hear the electric lights or the ultraviolet, the lights flickering. He could hear that. The surface of my skin tingled with the sensations of air moving across it. My mouth tasted stale and dry. How bizarre to feel all my senses heightened and alert, as if I had just been born. Thoughts raced through my mind. This is no dream. I'm more alive than I've ever been. And that is the typical reaction. And it's almost like you shed the skin, you get out of the body, and you're free. So, intense, 74% experience that. Intense and generally positive emotions or feelings. Incredible peace or pleasantness, incredible joy. And this also comes over through loud and clear in many of the and I'm going to bring up I've become a big fan of this person, Mary Neal. She's actually a doctor. And she drowned while kayaking. And I don't know if it's in Chile. I think it was in Chile. And they were out in the middle of nowhere. She actually swam competitively in college, but she was very comfortable in the water. Her husband and her kayaked. They went down with friends who were like professional kayak training people. And so they knew what they were doing, and there was no way to get out of the river that they went down. It was in the middle of nowhere, and there was no way to access it other than by the water, and she drowned. And it was ironic because as a child, despite being, I think she swam from Michigan, the College of Michigan in her undergrad, so she was good in the water, but she had a fear of drowning, that someday she would drown. And she went over a significant drop. And it just so happened there was no easy flow out. There were rocks there, and she went down under the water, and her kayak got wedged and stuck in 10 feet of water. And she said, as a doctor, a spinal surgeon, she was calm. She remained calm, but she quickly realized this was probably not going to end well for her because she couldn't get out. The force of the water was so rapid. She was like bent over the front of her kayak. And even to try to get her arms up, like to let go of her, release her skirt so she could out, she couldn't do it. And so she would have classified herself as a cultural Christian. She went to church, but it was more of a Sunday morning thing than how I live my life thing, but she did believe in God, and she said, thy will be done. She prayed earnestly, thy will be done. And she said, at that very moment that I turned to him, I was overcome with an absolute feeling of calm, peace, and of the very physical sensation of being held in someone's arms while being stroked and comforted. I also experienced an absolute certainty that everything would be okay, regardless of the outcome. I knew with absolute certainty that I was being held and comforted by Jesus. She never turned around and saw him, but she knew. And that's one of the other things, is that they just know things. But and so it was a while before they even realized her parties that she was missing. And so she ended up being without oxygen for close to 30 minutes before they realized that she was missing, where she was, tried to get the boat, tried to get the kayak loose and get her onto the beach. And they were trained. I mean, they taught St. People water safety, so they knew what they were doing. But so that was a miracle that she came back, right? And that's so the incredible peace or pleasantness, incredible joy. She does talk about that too here in a minute. I don't want to jump ahead. Passing into or through a tunnel, 34%. Yeah, this really wasn't that prevalent. Sometimes people like Don Piper, when he got hit by the semi, the next thing he knew, he was at the gates of heaven right away. And that's something that it struck me, is that I don't go around thinking that in one breath I could be here, I'm here, and in another breath, that time I could be in heaven. It can happen that fast. Maybe some of that's because you're unconscious, I don't know. But that's what he experienced. I mean, that was like, wow. I don't think that way when I'm doing whatever, but it's true. It could be. But so he didn't go through a tunnel. Sometimes people, they'll just leave the atmosphere, the earth, and they'll go through space and they'll see all kinds of galaxies and everything. So this one, you hear it a lot, but it's not for it's not for everybody. Encountering a mystical or brilliant light. This one, yeah, this is actually from Howard Storm again, the person I was saying that was the atheist who had the hellish experience. Far off in the darkness, I saw a pinpoint of light like the faintest star in the sky. I wondered why I hadn't seen it before. And then it starts getting bigger and bigger, bigger. And this is after he called out, Jesus saved. That's when this light appeared, and it got brighter and brighter and brighter and brighter. And it turned out it was Christ coming to take him from right outside of the doorstep of hell, so to speak. And there's another person, Captain Dale Black, who was, oh my gosh, he and two other pilots hit a monument at 135 miles an hour, 70 feet up in the air. And so it was like the plane exploded. He survived, but he had terrible injuries. But that's what he saw. He saw a light, and again, it was God approaching. It started as a light and then it got bigger and bigger and bigger. So there are other stations where it doesn't turn into that. They just see the light. But so that's a mystical or brilliant light at the end of the tunnel. And when the wings enveloped me, I became part of the white light. So this was all of these, what I have in the slides here, those were all in the original book about the study. So I can't tell you any more about the wings, but that was just to kind of give people a sense of what these different elements were. Encountering other beings, either mystical beings or deceased relatives or friends. We talked about this in the study, 57%. Most deceased beings are deceased relatives as opposed to friends or loved ones, but also they see somebody who they would say, I know is the creator. somehow they just know. God, Jesus, angels, there's lots of angels. So the interesting thing, Mary Neal, who was the person that drowned, she said when she came up, when her body left the kayak and she came up out of the water, she similarly didn't go through a tunnel, but as soon as she came out of the water, there was the gathering of saints. And she didn't actually know any of the people from Earth. She didn't have anybody in her life, like her grandparents were still alive, her parents were still alive. So she didn't really know anybody close to her that had died. And so she didn't see, it's just, I encountered a group of 15 to 20 souls, which is human spirits sent by God, who greeted me with the most overwhelming joy I had ever experienced and could ever imagine. The welcoming committee seemed to be wildly cheering for me as I approached the finish line, as she called it. And so she didn't know them on Earth, but she said she felt like she knew them all. And she had known them for as long as she existed. So that was, I don't know, Dale Black was the same way. He didn't see anybody he recognized from Earth, but he felt like he knew the people. And I think that was, and some of this is what happened to Colton Burpo, where it was his grandfather, but he'd never met his grandfather, and his grandfather was young. Later he saw a picture and said, oh, that's Pop. So it could be that too. But yeah, angels, there is a lot of discussion about angels. Howard Storm, that angels, there's another man, Jim Woodford. I don't think I brought his book, but he when we talk about how much God loves us, that he's willing to wait for the very last second. That was Jim Woodford's experience. He was not a good person in terms of living for himself. But he had contracted this Guillain-Barré disease, which was very unusual. So they didn't diagnose it until there really wasn't much they could do about it. And so he was on narcotic medication because it's terribly painful. And he accidentally, and he found that the more he took, the better he felt. Because the pain was terrible. So he took more than he was supposed to, and he would hide it. But he was going to sell some land. And so it felt so good to get in his truck and drive. He did. He went out to do some final measurements or confirm. And he took more. And it turns out he took too much. And he felt this burning sensation coming from his feet up through his legs that he actually looked and said, was there a fire in the vehicle? But he knew, he recognized. And I don't remember who, there was another person that said this, and I don't remember which one it was, but said, when you're dying, And this sense of sadness came over him because he had a whole garage full of British sports cars. He had been very successful in business. He was a commercial pilot. And he always thought the way that you excelled in the world was to be the biggest, baddest bear in the woods, as he described it. And so he wasn't, his wife was a prayer warrior Christian woman. And so he would go to church with her, but he accompanied her. But anyway, so he's feeling this experience in his truck. And this sadness came over him. And just this thought that I had this wonderful life, I'm dying, and I've never said thank you. And so he just said, God, thank you. I feel so bad that I've been, he hadn't explored that at all. And so the last thing he did before he died is he just said, God, forgive me. And that's what it took. But so he left and went through the tunnel, and I won't digress too much here because he does have, again, he has, all of them have, a lot of them have books. People say, oh, they're making money. Well, they're not making money off books that could cost money to publish a book, but And some of the things when they do, one of the things when they come back, God or Jesus will say, now tell everybody what you have seen. I'm real. Heaven's real. Hell is real. And so they put them out of their comfort. He puts us out of our comfort zones. Like, this is not comfortable for me. Because what I've learned too is that what I feel is one of the reasons we're here is to grow, to become more like God. To love God, which means if you love God, you love his people. And certainly Howard Storm was disappointed when he didn't get to go to heaven. One of the things I told him, you're not ready for heaven. You need to go back to the earth. You know, you've got to, and they gave him things he needed to do, which were very uncomfortable for him. And he asked a lot of great questions too. And I hopefully maybe we'll see if we have time, we can talk about some of that. But he was a very successful art professor. He'd gotten tenure while he was in his 20s. They had the 2 cars, the house, everything. And so he had grand expectations when he asked Christ, well, what do you want me to do? And Christ said, okay, I guess I'm jumping ahead here, but I'll finish that story. And God says, I want you to love the person you're with. And he's like, okay. And then what do you want me to do? Not realizing how big of a challenge that really is. He thought he would make him a big monument because he was a sculptor. And Jesus was like, well, you can do that, but remember, you're doing it for yourself. You're not doing it for us. We don't care about that stuff. And but that was also his way of avoiding people. Like, he could do this big thing, and then it would be curious, and lots of people would come and look at it, and then he could tell them about God. But then while he was doing that, he would be away by himself working on it. But yeah, so I lost my place now. I apologize for that. But I guess that's still under the part of encountering other beings, other mystical beings or deceased relatives. So
I know you told me about that, right?
Yeah.
That whole concept of loving the person that you're.
yeah, that's one of my takeaways. So I kind of jumped the gun. A sense of alteration or time and space. Again, that's widely seen, 61%. It seemed as though I had experienced so much in such a small length of earthly time. Well, I'll go back to Howard Storm because both he and Mary Neal said that Jesus was the most kind, patient teacher that they'd ever had. And so Howard did not have any type of a theological background and so he had Jesus says, okay, do you have any questions? He's like, I got a million questions. And he answered them. And he said if it would have been equivalent of 2 years of grad school if he relayed everything that he asked him.
Yeah, question. You've read a lot on this, obviously. And, you know, a lot of these near-death experiences, they're going to have full joy, interesting relatives, friends. I often think about what if you get there, and anybody in these experiences, you know, like they see mom, but where's dad?
You know what, Pastor, I'm going to kind of lean on you for this because I don't think we think about it. I think we're happy for all the people that are there. Because similar question is, well, how can God wipe away every tear if my husband's not there? And I don't think we think about that because it doesn't exist there, right?
Yeah, I mean, that I think would be our answer is that we won't have the knowledge of those who aren't there, right? That it almost will be erased from our memories to some degree because that would bring us sorrow and sadness in that experience, which clearly
But-
scriptures say, yeah.
But there wouldn't be anybody that doesn't have anybody there, because some of the folks, and I forget the gentleman's name, I just watched his testimony on YouTube. I mean, they have generations. Every generation, all the way back to who knows when. I mean, there's, and then it was with some of these other folks, there's some, I guess, I don't know if our souls originated when we were conceived or when they originated before, but when we go back, when we go there, everybody feels like, oh my gosh, I'm coming home. And there's people who say, well, okay, I didn't know them on earth, but I know them and they know me and they know everything about me. So we just don't remember, or I don't know how that happens.
And that's always the debate, right? That scientists, doctors will tell us that we don't use the full capacity of our brain. When we were originally created, did we have that capacity? And then in the fall, it's almost like the Lord took some of that away from us, because imagine having that full capacity now as sinners, right? What we
Yes.
might be capable of or do. So then in heaven, it's like we're given back. So that might have something to do with the full sense, like the senses, right? That now you are who exactly you were always meant to be, or how we were always meant to be as creatures created by God, with like this amazing senses, and maybe they're dulled now. I don't know. But it's a good question. Yeah. It's the same thing with people all the time thinking about their loved ones looking down upon them. It's like, that's not the focus of heaven.
Yeah, that did come up in terms of you grow more distant when you get there. Things like Mary Neal was actually getting kind of irritated because when she left her body and she met all this 20 saints, and they started walking on this path, and it was like a joyous celebration, and it was so beautiful, and then you can see the light of God's throne and God's light. And God's light is not like here. It's like it's light, it's love, it's life, all in one. And you feel like it's uniquely you. He loves you. But it's because he creates, and again, this is just what I'm repeating, but he has a unique love for each of us. And so this person that I was reading, he said he thought about his mom, and he could feel how God loved her. And so she would feel like she's the only person. And it's just amazing. So Mary was going down this path, and it was great. And these people down on the riverbank kept calling to her. They wanted her to come back and breathe. And so she says, okay, I'll go back. And so she would go and get into her body and take a breath, because they only said one breath, and then she would leave and go catch up, and she'd get further down the path, and she was getting closer. And she had been assured that everything would be okay with her kids. Everything was going to be fine. Don't worry about that. And so then she could still hear them like calling out, Mary, Mary, come take a breath. Because these people, the 18-year-old son of her friends was like really emotional. He wasn't able to maintain the professional distance that first responders have to have, or people that just have to have, that it's just a person. He couldn't do that. So he was like literally very emotional. And so she'd go back, she'd take another breath, and she did that numerous times, but she didn't want to go. She felt pulled to where God was. And so there's things like that where we can't comprehend. It's ineffable, I think is the word. They can't describe it in our vocabulary, what it's like. They try to give analogies because that's the best as they could do. So life review, this is one that kind of stood out to me, only that 22% of the people see that. A review of prior events of the NDEer's life can be either fragments of one's earthly life may be seen, or the review may be panoramic, covering all of one's earthly life. And these are not your personal memories. These are, because these are also from a third party view. So every thought, every word, every experience in our life is kept. And sometimes people will see just a flash. Like Captain the Dale Black did, he just saw a picture when he was praying in Sunday school. He was 19, but sometimes you see the whole thing. And again, what this Mary Neal said is that the way she described it is like, it's like you're back reliving it. You're in the moment, but it happens really fast. So you're just flooded with information. And Christ was there and angels were there. And one of them actually said, the angels, one of the things they do is they record it. Record your life. Wow. But she and events that you don't remember because they start right when you're born and go through the whole thing up until you pass. And she said they chose the events I wouldn't have picked. Howard Storm said the same thing. They didn't show any of his athletic competitions winning. None of that was in there. For Mary, they chose things that were very hard for her. She was molested as a child. That was in there. And the thing that is unusual about it, I guess we would think, is that so God is there, the angels are there, and people will say oftentimes, I read numerous times, there's no judgment. It's like, oh, what do they mean? It's important to focus on what they experience, not necessarily how they interpret it, which is what John Burke does in that book. And I think what they mean is, like Howard was still being held by Christ when this happened. And what they start feeling guilty because they see how the angels and God are saddened when they do things that aren't nice, when they become very self-centered and they hurt people. But they're not saying, oh, you should do that. They're just like sad. It's like they're hurt by it when they see us hurt other people or disregard other people. And then when we show love to people, then they're like, oh, yes. That's what it is, Don't care if when you made tenor, don't care about all that stuff. Because Howard actually asked him, well, where's this and where's that? Because that's what in the world, that's what he thought was important. And the response was, well, we don't care about that. It was all about our interactions with people and how we treat people every day. And what Mary saw when it is not just that situation, but the ripple effects many times over in terms of how the impact of that, what then happened with that person and their reaction, that person and their reaction. And she said 20, 30 times removed was she could understand. And what it taught her is that our actions really matter and that God can use, it's Romans 8:28, God can use all things for good. It may not be obvious to you in that moment, but we have to trust him that it will lead to good if it's according to his purpose. And that blew me away. I'll admit, when my brother died when he was 16 and I was 14, we both got the flu on the same day. I went to school on Monday, he didn't. A week later, he was dead. And I had a lot of, say, survivor's guilt. I had trouble with that. I really did. He was my best friend. And I think I had kind of gotten over it. I'd kind of accepted it. I'm going to see him again and we can catch up. So I think that's why this really spoke to me, because what good can come from a 16-year-old son when my mom had lost her other son as a day-old infant? What good could come from that? And what am I supposed to do? There must be something I'm supposed to do if he picked me, right? Anyway, so yes, so regardless of the circumstances, God can make all things for good, and we have to learn to trust it. So, so the unworldly heavenly realms, I think we talked about this, how everything's beautiful, blue skies, all of it was full of light. not, as if from within itself. I think that's really God's light shining through it. There aren't any shadows there in heaven. The light, it was emitting, not reflecting. Yeah, that's consistent. I mean, that light comes from God. Encountering or learning special knowledge. When I looked into his eyes, all the secrets of the universe were revealed to me. I know how everything works because I looked into his eyes. Mary Neal talks about that. It's like you just have this understanding of how the universe works. You just know. And if you have questions, sometimes it's like, you know, the people, they don't talk vocally normally. It's all thought. And the information, before you've even finished asking the question, you have the answer. But there's just so much more that we're gonna say, like those things that we don't understand, I think that really bother us. When we get there, we'll know. Right? So, and a lot of it, when they come back, they don't remember, but some of it they do. So yes, accounting a boundary or a barrier. Very common, 31%. So of course, this is the intermediate heaven, the second heaven. None of the people that I read went past it. It's like they just started, like Don Piper, he started, they were going to go through the gate and then boom, he was back in his body. And that, several of them, that's what they said. They just started and there was this big party they could see. I don't know if it was the marriage feast. They're at this big hall and the door, and they start to go through the door and they see there's people in there and it's loud, and they're having a great time, and then boom, they can't stay. Gotta go. It's not your time yet. That's the comment. You've got more to do. It's not your time yet. And then a return to the body, either voluntarily or involuntarily. There are some people that say they knew they had small children and were okay with coming back for that. The vast majority of people did not want to come back. They felt this is where they should be. They were home. And some also had very big concerns, like Don Piper. What's my body going to be like when I get back, right? But so the conclusions, this particular doctor he did go out and say, oh, don't. Like there was a study of studies in November 23 by the New York Academy of Sciences. It's like they say we can't disprove any of this. That's different than saying there's life after death. But this person does, this Jeffrey Long, that it's reasonable to accept the existence of life after death. And there's been so many studies, so many stories. I guess I'm surprised it's not talked about more, because if once people accept there's life after death, and it's like, okay, what's the next thing? Is it with God or was it something else? And that's why there was a movie that came out in 2023. I watched it like 4 times, called After Death by Angel Studios, was distributed. Yes. And a lot of these same people are in there. And the point of it is not conversion per se, but the point is to encourage that discussion about, and they say make your own conclusions, but not this doctor, but another doctor says, you know, after a while you get enough ancillary points or encounters. It's kind of like, I don't know if that's witnesses in a court case or what the analogy is, that you have to accept it. I mean, we know so little about the brain. And once you leave the universe, I mean, they can't record what we're seeing in our mind. And so they can't prove that scientifically, right? And so the only other choice is to do all of these studies. And but I think that's where we are. Highly organized lucid, or lucid being really clear, NDEs are medically inexplicable. There's no way they can, they have no other solution, put it that way. What's seen, heard in the OBE state is almost always real. This is a big one for the doctors and the scientists. And what they've found is they're very accurate. Like there's even, and this one is in the movie too. they did a standstill procedure on a woman because she had a aneurysm in the base of her brain. And so they had to go all the way down to the base of her brain, which is very dangerous, difficult to do. And so they put her in a standstill mode, which they drained the blood out of her body. Her eyes were covered. They put devices in her ears to tick, 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 tick. And then with that on, they monitored her brain to see any kind of brain waves. And she was in this state for an hour. And the surgery was successful. So the next day they talked to one of the orderlies, and this is a world-renowned neurosurgeon that did this. One of his orders came and was doing the journal. Okay, how are you feeling today? And she started say, hey, I heard the doctor say this and this yesterday, how they had to switch from one leg to the vein and one leg to the other leg because it was some term. And she saw the saw, and it said it looked like my water pick or something. He got in that order. He freaked out because there's no way that she could know that. No way. But she did, and it was. I mean, they're accurate, and they've done a lot of people coming out of not comas. Comas are a little different, but yeah, there's been so many studies on this that they'll see things like a label on top of a rotary a ceiling fan, like a serial number, and they'll tell like a nurse or something. I was like, well, go. I was up by the ceiling, and they're like, what? Oh, you weren't up by the ceiling. You were unconscious. It's like, no. I saw this sticker, and here's the number, go check. And so they get on a ladder, go up there, and she's right. Or they find there's a common one about they took some guy's dentures out and they put him in a drawer, and then he woke up like 3 days later. And it's like, I need my dentures. I was like, what? Don't know anything about your dentures. He says, well, and he saw them. He says, so you took the dentures out of my mouth and put them in this drawer on this one cart. And so they go and look and they find him, or a shoe that's outside on the roof that's got a scuff mark in a certain place. How would you see that? And so when scientists hear that, they can verify that. And so they say it's almost always real, it's almost always accurate. Blind NDEers often have visual experiences. It could be people blind from birth. And so the way they describe things can be a little different, but they've also gone back and verified what they've told them as being correct. So that's obviously not then your physical eyes that are involved. Life reviews accurately reflect real events in Ender's life, even if they've forgotten about them. There's remarkable consistency in NDEs around the world. This is where it's studying what they experience versus how they interpret, because they may interpret as a different God or something like that. And then they're transformed in many ways, often for life. I mean, all of these people have been transformed. They change. I can't remember the one man's name, but he said he and his wife had to get to know each other again because he was so impacted by his experience in heaven, where he went to Jesus 3 times, and Jesus told him, it's not your time, you got to go back. And then he would go back. He didn't go through the forest, he went over the forest. I mean, it's like Jesus walking on the water. You can go up so high, and then you can just move around. So he would go, and he would go back, and he would get the sense, oh, my body's not ready yet. So he would go back to Jesus, and Jesus would send him back. 3rd time he returned, but yeah, their relationship, they had to do some relearning. I would say John Burke's life has been transformed, not by the NND himself, but through his research of it. He was an agnostic until he read the Life After Life book. His father was given to his father who was dying from cancer. So he read it and he was like, wow, as an engineer, I can relate. As an analytical person, I can relate. So he needed to learn more. He actually, part of that was joining a Bible study to learn more about God. And he came to faith, switched to seminary from engineering career, founded a church for skeptics like him. And he said he loved being a pastor. He wasn't too sure about writing, but he felt prompted by God to write Imagine Heaven. And then another book, Imagine the God of Heaven. Some of this, it's all about love. These were Howard Storm asking questions of Jesus, which I think it's just summarizes, make it very simple. The center of every soul is the love of God. The desire to realize who you truly are, to become a child of God, is the only reason you are born into this world. And that's pretty awesome, pretty compelling. The greatest gift is to love God or to refuse it. You still have a job to do, which is to take care of the people God needs you to love. You are the hands and feet in the world to care for them. And that's the thing. It's all about love. Nothing else really matters. And Howard Storm was told, you can save the world. And he didn't mean just Howard, he meant all of us. And this is my new motto, love the person you're with. And it's because of the ripple effects that Mary Burke saw her in DE. That if you're kind, loving to someone, maybe they'll take it and love somebody else, which Howard was skeptical of. But we're not alone. He was told, well, there's millions of people loving people, and that God and his angels will help us. Mary was certainly helped by angels because she came back to life, but then they were in the middle of nowhere, and these two Chilean guys were there, not dressed for water or anything else. One of them just happened to have a machete. So they chopped their way up the bank, came to a dirt road. There was no satellite phones. This was around 2000. I think she had hers. Nothing like that. They were out in the middle of nowhere. They get up to this dirt road and there's an ambulance waiting. And a man there didn't say anything, didn't ask about her condition, didn't ask for any information. And her friend's like, what are you doing here? He said, waiting. So they put her in the ambulance. Of course, they never found those people ever again. But yeah, miracles. And so based on her input, I do now pay more attention to circumstances that may seem a little odd. She says, write them down. We're much more reflect after the fact than think ahead. You write them down and look back on it from time, and you think, not she doesn't say they're all miracles or that God's or angels are intervening, but she's open to the possibility. And there's definitely a time when I look back when I was a kid and we were up in rural northern Minnesota. And my brother and I were collecting beer cans, and I asked my dad to take me out. And this is like 10 miles from the Canadian border. I asked my dad to take me out to the highway so I can collect some beer cans because they had some Schmidt cans up there that were all different. But he didn't stay with me, he left. And this other truck pulled up, and this guy was saying, hey, you need a ride? I don't remember, I was in middle school maybe. You need a ride? And I said, no, I'm fine. He stayed there, kept following me along. And I don't know, half hour, 40 minutes, I don't know, that I was out there. How long he was there, I don't remember. And then I just decided that, okay, yeah, I don't know why my dad's taking so long. I'll get in the truck with him. And I looked up and it was right then that my dad came pulling up. And so I changed direction and I went and got in my dad's truck. And up there, everybody waves, and he didn't acknowledge that person when we passed him. I never asked him about it. He never said anything. But I wondered if that guy didn't have my best interest in mind. And then we have to trust God regardless of our circumstances. The last thing I'll share with Mary Neal, blew me away. When she was with God before she came back, because she did not want to come back. She got a laundry list of things to do, but she also was made clear to her the reason that she needed to come back is because her oldest son was going to die when he was 18 or 19 years old. They were in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, lots of outdoorsy. I don't know, I quite understand why he was so big in the community, but he was. And she's like, well, why my son? What's the first reaction? And they took her back to the life review. Everything works for good. She still grieved, but it did happen. And so we have to trust. If we truly trust, then we can live in the moment and live with joy. And another example she gave, when she was on an airplane coming to give some talk. And there was a child on the airplane who was just having blow up. And so everybody was getting upset. And because they couldn't take off, they couldn't leave. And so finally they left the plane, and then Mary thought, well, okay, I missed my connection. I'm gonna get off the plane too. And so she saw the parents, and so she went up, being a doctor, she went up and talked to them. And they told her they had adopted that boy, because everybody's getting mad, right? And they had adopted that boy, and he had been a sex traffic victim. And so it was something about the getting on the plane for him brought back terrible memories. And so they couldn't get him to do it. And so they took him off the plane. And so I mean, okay, what does that say about, people start complaining, oh, this is just really, and it's, you never know.
Well, thank
Yeah,
you so
I know,
much,
that was,
for presenting this. Two things, and then I'll let you go. I had a member in my previous church in Iowa that shared a story with me of where his car broke down, had somebody that just kind of randomly pulled up, took him to the next town, and then he turned around and it wasn't there anymore, right? And he was the most like soft-spoken, easygoing guy you'd never expect, right, for him to share a story like that, but he did, right? And I'll share one more, and this would really, I just was thinking about this. A lot of people you guys don't know this story, but when I had my heart attack a couple years ago, my wife has a picture of Ben the day before. We were at the church, right? That would have been a Saturday. They were there for some reason. And she's got a picture of him kneeling down in front of the altar as he was praying about something. That was the day before my heart attack. Yeah. But anyway, so who knows what was, but it was just like, I hadn't even thought about that until she showed a picture of not that long ago. It's like, wow, that maybe he sensed something. Even that day. Okay. I don't know if I've told you this story either. Okay. I'm sorry. Can you guys hear me? I'll try to talk loud. But Katie, my daughter, she came with me that day for basketball. But it's like she couldn't go into the gym. Like she was too like anxious and worried about like people seeing her. She was hiding behind the door around the corner. So we had to call my wife to come and get her, and she had come to get her. So she was not here when it happened, which would have been really terrifying for her to be here. But, I just got to believe that was the Lord too. It's just incredible. So anyway, thank you for sharing. Yeah, it's amazing.
wish there would be more public discussion of it, because it seems like the evidence is so overwhelming. And I know the Catholic Church one here, when he was the president of Gonzaga University for 100 years, he speaks science and religion. They've actually come up with a curriculum for middle schoolers and high schoolers that does more of the evidence basis for life after death. Which makes it, I guess, what's the right way to say this, but makes believing in God more. That's the right way. So when they survey kids when they leave the high school, and it has had an impact on how many actually don't just study it, have faith in God as a result of it. I don't know, it seems overwhelming to me, but I'm a science person, I guess. So.
No. Right. Well, let's close the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thine will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our
daily bread.
Forgive us our trespasses,
As
we
we
forgive
forgive
those
those who trespass against us.
lead us not into temptation, deliver us
Deliver us from evil.
the kingdom, power,
For your years, now and forever. Amen.
Well done, Michaeline. Good job. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, I was,